Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I'm live. I couldn't get on. I was being cut off. Maybe it was the dark side of the force, people coming after me. I don't know. Once again, welcome. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. It is I, the Viscount, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, your host here on Robservations, the show about something. This is Robservations number 226. My God, first of all, I want to thank you all for still being here after 226 episodes. And I also want to thank who? Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great for still sponsoring this show. There's going to be a new episode of Living the Lucky Tiger Life ready to drop soon, probably over the weekend. So that's very exciting. And I want to thank Lucky Tiger for continuing to sponsor these live chats and everything that I am doing, which is phenomenal. And also, if you go to their website and, of course, getluckytiger.com and you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, you will get 20% off your order if you buy any of their products. Now, there's a couple of things off the top that I want to talk about. First of all, yes, I was wearing a Robservations t-shirt yesterday. A lot of people asked about them. You know, it's funny. Toward the beginning of this, I basically wanted shirts myself. So there was a few designs that people had done for me. And Brendan Heifetz, who did some graphics and made the Robservations logo and stuff, I wanted to make Robservation shirts so I could wear them. I mean, I put them up. I mean, I haven't sold very many and I haven't pushed them, but they're really good t-shirts and the hoodies are especially good. So somebody saw, or actually a lot of you asked that I had a Robservation shirt on and wanted to know where to get it. So I put that link up in the live chat. If you want to stream back up to the top, you can see it. And T Fury is having like a 35% off sale. And also what's cool is you can get phone cases and you can get coffee mugs and all kinds of things. And you can change the colors and the sizes and all that. So it's kind of fun. It's mix and match, plug and play. It's good. So if you want Robservations shirts, I'll make more merch later. I didn't think there was that much of an interest in it, but now, of course, people seem to be interested. So there you go. I forgot that I even had it. It's like, wow. And those Robservation shirts, they get more comfortable as you wash them. And I particularly love their hoodies. And fall is upon us and winter is coming. Actually, doesn't fall start on the 23rd of September officially? Anyway, another thing off the top is yesterday I tweeted very sort of tongue-in-cheekly. I did see a video that a Dutch priest, he made a video about Disney Plus. He was using Disney Plus because it has been launched in the Netherlands. And I thought that was kind of cool. And he's a huge Star Wars fan. And by the way, Disney Plus's interface looks awesome. And he goes to it really interactive, really interesting, and really easy to use. Great to navigate. So he goes and he puts on Empire Strikes Back. And I noticed that Empire Strikes Back began with the Lucasfilm logo with what seemed to be a hastily put underneath strain of Star Wars music, John Williams score. But look, this is nothing new. I just want to point out this is nothing new. Empire and Jedi have not had the Star Wars or the 20th Century Fox. What am I saying? I was tweeting about the fact that there's no 20th Century Fox logo in front of the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. I would presume. Actually, I said the trilogy, which was mistaken because Star Wars has had the 20th Century Fox logo on it streaming, but Empire and Jedi have not. I was hoping, perhaps naively, that when Disney bought Fox, that they would reinstate the 20th Century Fox logo on the front of Empire and Jedi. Why did I want that? Well, first of all, the 20th Century Fox CinemaScope extension that has the da-na-na-na, 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 in addition to the normal part of the 20th Century Fox logo, that 20th Century Fox theme, their theme music, was recomposed and re-recorded by John Williams for Empire Strikes Back. So the CinemaScope extension logo on the 20th Century Fox logo for Empire was actually John Williams music. And that's kind of why I wanted it back, because to me, Star Wars, it's strange to see a Star Wars movie without the 20th Century Fox logo in front of it, because the drum beat, the snare, the Dun, 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 dun. That's the normal Fox logo. And then they added for the CinemaScope extension in the 50s the dun 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 dun. That's Star Wars to me, because for the first 6 years I watched Star Wars from 1977 to 1983, that was the Star Wars always began with the 20th Century Fox logo. And to me, it was like, it's not quite an overture because it's quick, but it those beats, they screamed Star Wars. And even though, Alien too, Alien had the Fox logo on it, Big Trouble in Little China, Buckaroo Banzai, movies that I grew up with watching. I love the 20th Century Fox logo. It was my favorite studio logo. I've always loved it. And I understand that when Disney bought Lucasfilm, that why would you promote another studio? That doesn't make any sense. I get it. I understand. Now, Fox, the rights for Star Wars, the original Star Wars, are different because Fox owned Star Wars. Fox paid for Star Wars. So that's why the Star Wars logo was always on the front of Star Wars. But Empire and Jedi were paid for by George Lucas himself. So there didn't have to be the Fox. There is precedence for not having studio logos in front of movies. When things change hands, movies change hands, libraries change hands. So it's not like it's an unprecedented thing. So, it's not like it's this horrible thing, and I was being overly histrionic on Twitter. There was an element of tongue in cheek to this when I saw The Priest, and it didn't have the 20th Century Fox logo. And for Empire, it's particularly stinging for me because, as everyone knows, I saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater 26 times upon first run throughout the summer of 1980 and into the fall. And it's just, and the fact that it was re-recorded for, I think it was like Alfred Newman. I think Kevin Rubio tweeted me something that it was Alfred Newman who had recorded that Fox fanfare in the 50s. And it just screamed Star Wars to me. And like with the special editions, when things are being changed, it doesn't really sit well with me. It just seems odd that you're going to change the historical perspective of a film. Like, do you really need to do that? I mean, I don't know. Maybe you do. Perhaps you do. I think maybe you don't. But so I was just tweeting about that. I was hoping that with Disney Plus, that they might reinstate the Fox logo in front of Empire and Jedi. They have not done that, apparently. I can't speak to Jedi, but I saw it with my own eyes on the video. You can find it too. I guess Priest talks about Disney Plus. You can go see this video. He's a very nice chap. His English is quite good. And he was it's always fun to see a man of the cloth, or I guess a woman of the cloth too, watching their youthful exuberance over Star Wars. Star Wars is truly universal. Everyone loves Star Wars. So that's always good to watch. But anyway, then of course I get pulled into these discussions about I think one of the great I guess it's one of the great sadness. It's the great sadness of the modern age, especially for imagination connoisseurs such as ourselves, we members of the Post-Geek Singularity, is the vitriolic hatred of things that were once universally loved. And as everyone knows, I might have seen Empire Strikes Back in the theater 26 times, but I have often cited as Return of the Jedi as being the most disappointing cinema-going experience, the most disappointing cinema-going experience I ever had. Most people are like, "What? How could you think that? How could you possibly think that? Return of the Jedi, it's John Campia's favorite Star Wars movie." Well, here's the thing. I'm old. Like I'm older than most of the YouTube pundits. In fact, I mean, there's not a day goes by where somebody in a comment section or somebody on Twitter doesn't remind me of the fact that I'm old. And I would say I represent what I would like to call first generation post-geek singularity, or an OG, an original geek. And there are going to be people that take me to task for this. But I think that what makes it, as far as the current landscape goes, especially YouTube pundits, any movie fans, and let's face it, the movie industry and Hollywood has given rise to the YouTube pundit, and there's a lot of them. And I've been involved in the YouTube pundit space since John Schnepp brought me on board Collider Heroes back in April of 2015. And even then, I go back and I look at people that they've been on YouTube for 10 years. They've been on YouTube for a long time. Gilbert he's going under my desk and he's caught himself on no, Gilbert, he's caught himself on one of my wires. Come on, buddy. There you go, buddy. Okay. Gilbert his new thing is he enjoys, I hope you can still hear me. It didn't sound like I cut out there, but Gilbert likes to crawl underneath my desk and sort of sit underneath me. That's his new thing, which is fine because he's a great dog. But anyway, so I'm old. I mean, I'm really old, like in the YouTube space. I'm not as old as some people, but I'm older than most. And I was there, I saw Star Wars when it opened in the theater, and I was already pretty old. I was 10 in 1977, turned 10 in 1977. So it makes me old. So a lot of people are, I'm sure there's a contingent of people on the internet, and rightfully so. They're like, why should we listen to some old guy talking? Well, that's fine. But the thing that I bring, the thing that being old and with one foot in their graves brings me in terms of perspective in the movie pundit space is that I watched all of these things that didn't exist come into existence. I saw Jaws first run in the theater, and that's about as far back as I went because I was 8, and before that, and I grew up with James Bond movies. Like if you're 25 years old, or even if you're 30 years old or younger, you have a much different. Or even actually, I'd go all the way up to 35. If you're 35 or younger, you have a much different perspective on the great movies than I do, because a lot of them, especially that sweet spot, that genre sweet spot, and I would say, I'd even go back as far as The Exorcist in the early 70s. You go back to The Exorcist, and if you go, let's make it 1973. Let's just say 73 all the way up to 90. There was a 17-year period of time where there was an explosion of fantasy filmmaking, and there was all of these movies that we now consider classics, and there was something different about seeing them, and I'm not saying better, just different. When you lived in a world where movies like Star Wars did not exist. As a matter of fact, no one could even conceive of a movie like Star Wars existing, because there had been nothing like it, nothing remotely similar. Sure, we'd had science fiction films that were even very respectable. The Day the Earth Stood Still, War of the Worlds, Forbidden Planet, Planet of the Apes, 2001, and a number of others. But the epic space fantasy that Star Wars represented and the way it was presented to us didn't exist. 2 years later, Alien did the same thing. Alien reinvented the horror genre, or the horror science fiction genre, in grand fashion. Alien, still one of what I like to say as the, of course, viceroy of verisimilitude. Alien, to me, it has of all the fantasy films ever made, even maybe more so than Star Wars, Alien has incredible verisimilitude. And nobody had ever seen anything like that either. You can go back and The Terror from Beyond Space or whatever, or Planet of the Vampires. You can say, yeah, they were like Alien. They really weren't like Alien. Sure, their basic plot mechanics were similar, but the look, the vision, what Ridley Scott brought to the screen in Alien, nothing like that had ever been seen before. Now, I'm not saying that I'm better, or people that are younger than me are lesser than me. I'm not saying, that's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying that to have been in a world where you watched something that didn't exist come into existence changes your perception of things. Now, I would say that there are 2 movies in the 90s that I often cite as being like those other movies. One is Jurassic Park, and the other is The Matrix. Because Jurassic Park, the vision of photorealistic dinosaurs, it gets parodied a lot, but Sam Neill stepping up and taking off his glasses, and you see that dinosaur, I think it's the brachiosaur, I always say brachiosaur, I'm probably wrong about that, but rears back and takes the leaves off the trees, and you see even the shot in the distance with the children, and you see all of the dinosaurs in the water. Nothing like that had ever been seen before. Sure, there'd been dinosaurs depicted in movies, but not like that. I mean, for the first time ever, there were photorealistic dinosaurs on the screen, and you believed. And what was interesting, you had a master filmmaker in the guise of Steven Spielberg, who knew how to shoot and maximize. I mean, CG has come a long way since 1993. But if you watch that film, the way they designed those shots, and Spielberg is a maestro when it comes to this. He understands instinctively. He was a savant, knowing where to put the camera and to convey what he wanted to convey. And Jurassic Park is a marvel. Same with The Matrix. The bullet time effects, the way things worked, even the wire work, Yen Wuoping. We'd seen it in Chinese movies, of course, but wire work was relatively unfamiliar on a large scale to Western audiences. It was amazing. And we saw a vision of visual effects and things going on in The Matrix no one had ever really seen. So it's not like these new visions of cinema were unique to my generation. It was the film goers. Now, one of the things that has been great about being an OG geek like myself is I've managed to sort of, basically the world for me hasn't changed since I was 12. It's kind of the same in that I dreamed of these things when I was a kid, and then I started to get them at a time, and they've never stopped coming down the pike. Technology has been increasing. Like, look, whatever you think about the Transformers movies, the first Transformers movie and the depiction of the transformations. I mean, I know if you're a Transformers I had no connection to the Transformers cartoon series at all, because when I first saw Transformers, they were repackaged versions of other Japanese toys that I liked. So I was like, what is this? I never watched the cartoons. I did see the movie. I kind of like the Transformers movie with Unicron and all that. I thought that was relatively cool. But the visual effects, certainly ILM's transforming, it was amazing. Those were amazing. And, I often say that people are, the Transformers movies suck. I really enjoy even Transformers, the third one, Dark Side of the Moon, because of a lot of the visual effects work. And the battle in Chicago just touches something deep within my nerd lizard brain. Watching that kind of mayhem in action and done in such a photorealistic manner, I'm like, oh my God, it's amazing. That's why I love when movies like Shin Godzilla come out. I still have that joy and that awe and that wonder that I had when I was a child. It's never gone away, which I love that, and now we live in a time where, I've been showing Elizabeth the boys, and she fell asleep in the last episode. I mean, we've been watching it and she's loving it, but we're in the last episode and she gets too tired. She can't stay awake. And we're at literally episode 8 and episode 8. If there is ever a show that stuck its landing for what it is, The Boys. I mean, again, I read the comics and I like the concept. I think The Boys is an incredible series, and it's going to be really interesting to compare and contrast the Watchmen series with The Boys, because more so even in the TV than in the TV series than in the comics. The TV series, I think, it's better than even the original subject matter, and the ending it's a good one. So she couldn't get to the end. It was frustrating because I had to watch the end again because it so sticks that landing. And I can't wait to watch it with her, because she'll be like, I love the ending of The Boys. If you haven't seen The Boys and you like superheroes, I mean, it's just, everything about it is so great. But so living in this world and seeing all of these things when they were new, it was a great privilege and an honor. And it was something that was very galvanizing, and it kept my film interests up. And from the time I was 10 years old, I wanted to make movies. And it was a great way to grow up. By the way, I have something to report. Something from I want to toot my own horn. So many of you know, look, I do make films, and I've made music videos and television shows and all that. But one of the things that I did back in 2017 after the whole Axanar project went up in flames, and Alec moved to Atlanta. See, Alec likes to say that everything he says about me is complete ridiculousness. But anyway, so in 2017, a good friend of mine that I grew up with, one of my best friends from my youth, Dr. Michael Schertz. He is an ER emergency room doctor. He's also an 18 Delta, former Green Beret. He asked me to help him design basically a master class that we would film that he teaches. He has a company, and he taught a course called Tactical Crisis Medicine, Tactical Casualty Care. And it was all about pre-hospital care for people that are in active violent events, school shootings, building collapses, explosions, terrorist attacks, anything like that. And it's pre-hospital care, so you can potentially save someone's life if they've been wounded before an ambulance or EMTs arrive and can take them to a hospital where they can get more care. He asked me to create a video series for him, and it was 3 different courses. It was the 1-day course, the 3-day course, and the 5-day course. And I spent 8 days shooting this, and it's lecture stuff, and then it's scenarios where we're out in the field working with local law enforcement and SWAT and film these scenarios. And I designed it, produced it, directed it, shot it, and even production designed. And then I later edited all of it. It was over 50 hours of material. Well, we found out that yesterday, so we did this, we shot this in the summer of 2017. I edited it. I was editing it through most of 2018 because it turned out to be over 50 hours of material, and I was a one-man band on this. And it was just accredited. So if you are an EMT or a paramedic here in the United States, and maybe it's out of the United States too, you have to every couple of years do continuing education to keep your skills sharp. And the only continuing education that matters is accredited material. And this show, this lecture series that I shot, and it was a 4-camera shoot. You know, I wanted to make it look slick, like it was a network show, was just accredited. And I had never worked in that space before. And I was told by Mike and his lovely wife, Lori, that this is the highest, this is it. If your course is accredited, that's like winning the big award. So, you know, this was something I did that you as imagination connoisseurs might not be that interested in, although I would recommend anyone take at least the 1-day course because you might be able to save somebody's life. But I'm really, really happy to say that work was accredited because it was a 2-year project. Now, I did this concurrently with other things, such as I was working on Tango Shalom during this time, but it was very exciting for me to get that. So back to what I was saying. Anyway, that's just an aside. But all of these movies and seeing these new visions and watching computer technology and effects technology progress, beginning with, well, it was really Logan's Run that I started really getting into visual effects. I was 9 years old. And then moving forward, we've seen things it's been unbelievable. And Cinefex Magazine, when Cinefex Magazine came out back in, I want to say it was 79. Now, it had to have been 80. The first issue of Cinefex Magazine had 2 articles in it. No ads, 2 articles. One, the cover story was Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and then the back cover was Alien. So it was a great time to be a fan. And it also, you had to seek out all of this material. You really had to, if you wanted to, there was obviously no internet, so you had to, I was a little kid, I didn't drive, so I took buses, sometimes 3 and 4 buses to buy a movie poster or to get the new issue of Cinefex or go to the comic book store, get the new issue of Starlog or go to B. Dalton Books or whatever. You know, it was, to be a fan was to be a proactive person. And if you like many things, whether it's action figures or model kits or flying model rockets or books or comics or whatever it was you wanted, you had to travel to get them. You know, and luckily in Seattle where I grew up, there was a system, a great Metro bus system, and I started taking the Metro bus system when I was 10. I mean, I think about it now. I see 10-year-old kids, and the idea of a lot of them, you know, riding 2 and 3 buses into downtown a city alone or with their friends seems sort of silly now, but we were doing it. You know, our parents had the utmost. You could buy a full day bus pass for 50 cents and go anywhere you wanted, and our parents were supportive of that. But when I saw Return of the Jedi for the first time, it was a soul-crushing experience because I thought the movie was a complete everything that Star Wars and Empire was building to was really negated. I hated everything about Return of the Jedi when I first saw it. I hated the movie poster. The Jedi, I was like, the lightsaber. I mean, I'm like, what is this lackluster poster? I bought a Revenge of the Jedi poster from the Star Wars fan club, out of the pages of Bantha Tracks magazine. I mean, I was really into Star Wars. I had every action figure, model kit, every book, everything. I mean, I was really, 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 really into Star Wars. And when I saw Return of the Jedi, I didn't hate it. I mean, how could you have hated a Star Wars movie? I was just really, really, really disappointed. I felt it was a movie that was beneath me. And also, Star Wars came out when I was 10, when I was 13, and Jedi came out just for my 16th birthday. So I'd learned to drive, and I was seeing Return of the Jedi. And as I've talked about many times, the film to me, just honestly, I'll say it, was stupid. I mean, I felt that it was really, really, really dumbed down. Now, there are things in Return of the Jedi that I will always love. I loved when they rescued Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. I love that. I love the whole sail barge sequence. And look, despite size snoodles and the Rebo band and all that, I hated all the designs of the creatures. From the first time you see a Gamorrean guard, I'm like, this does not look, I don't believe this. I don't believe the design of this Gamorrean guard looks like he belongs in a cartoon. And he doesn't belong. He's not worthy of the designs that we'd seen in Star Wars and Empire. So right off the bat, I didn't like the tone of it. I didn't like the way R2 and 3PO were talking. I didn't like the lighting that was outside the door to Jabba's palace. It all looked phony and set bound. And there were things, the visual effects of Jabba's barge in the sand. I'm like, what is this? This is not convincing to me. I understand we'd never seen in the Star Wars universe. I mean, the stuff in Tatooine in the original Star Wars before the special edition all looked very realistic. But now we're seeing an optically printed, optically combined, whatever ILM was doing with that sail barge, the explosion when the sail barge blew up, the Sarlacc pit. It all looked like it was from Italian Star Wars knockoff to me. It was not worthy of what we had been watching up to that time. I hated R2 and 3PO falling into the sand, being picked up by the magnets. I hated it all. It wasn't lit correctly. Nothing about it looked right. There were cool things. Like I said, the rescue of Han Solo was cool. I really liked the space battle at the end. I loved how it's intercut with the troops on the ground and with, of course, Luke confronting the Emperor and Vader, which I loved. So there were, as much as there was stuff in it I hated, there was also a lot of stuff in it I loved, but it didn't all hold together, and it felt like it was tremendously dumbed down. So my hatred to understand, to be disappointed and to not like Star Wars was something that I came to terms with personally in 1983. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Again, anybody who loves Star Wars, I cannot recommend Rinsler's Making of Star Wars books, The Making of Star Wars, The Making of Empire, The Making of Return of the Jedi, because if you ever had any questions about decisions that were made or why things happened in the original trilogy, those books sum it up. And The Making of Return of the Jedi does a phenomenal job of addressing these things. But what it really clearly illustrated to me was, now that George Lucas was involved, he'd sort of retaken, Star Wars was a disaster when they were making it. And it was all the people such as Richard Chew and Marcia Lucas in the editing room and Paul Hirsch that really were able to shape that movie, and all Gary Kurtz and all the contributors turned it into what it is, the way, movies are made. Empire, Lucas was not as involved with the production of Empire. Irvin Kershner was directing it. Even to this day, George Lucas doesn't like Empire. To me, Empire solidified everything great about Star Wars and turned it into something even bigger and more important. But Jedi, I was like, what is this gobbledygook? There was no verisimilitude to me. And it's easy to talk about the Ewoks I understand what he was going for, and people talk about, oh, if it was Wookiees, but it would have been too expensive. I get all that, but it's not that so much that the Ewoks, I don't believe them. They just didn't look. There's no verisimilitude there. I didn't believe them. I didn't believe the Ewoks. I didn't believe it was all, the battle was a bunch of gags. It didn't seem like a real battle to me. There was no real peril. There was all kinds of just little things throughout Jedi that I can't abide. The matte painting of the Millennium Falcon when Han and Lando are in front of it talking, I'm like, that's the most unconvincing matte painting I've ever seen. When the Executor nosedives into the Death Star and you basically, like, there's some technician who's turning on the flames. It doesn't, come on. Well, I don't even like the optical when the A-Wing crashes into the bridge because it's a bad visual effect. Now, that is offset by, there's a lot of great battle visual effects. There's some beautiful effects in Jedi. I'm not going to say they're not, because there are. And I really liked the battle between Vader and the Emperor. But the Emperor, when Clive Revill was playing the Emperor in Empire, that Emperor was terrifying to me. And the Emperor in Return of the Jedi is Snow White. It's the witch in Snow White. Ian McDiarmid is Palpatine is Snow White. It's the evil witch from Snow White. And that's what I felt. I'm like, where is the contemplative Emperor that's like, yes, yes. By the way, that Emperor is no longer in The Empire Strikes Back. It's, of course, as we all know, Ian McDiarmid playing Palpatine, which makes me sad. Because in Empire, the fact that you only see a hologram of the Emperor and it's this guy that Vader is bowing to, and he's not overtly evil. He was quiet and contemplative. If he could be turned, he would be a valuable asset. Yes, yes. That guy was terrifying. And then you cut to Jedi, and when you first meet the Emperor, when he comes down, I'm like, wait a minute, where's the apple? It wouldn't surprise me if he had a poison apple. But here's the thing. As much as I disliked Return of the Jedi, I still bought it when it came out on VHS, and I watched it, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't like it nearly as much as I like Star Wars or Empire, but I would watch it. And if you watch all three together, it's very apparent how lacking that movie really is. And I'd still watch it and enjoy it because it was in fact Star Wars, but I didn't feel the need to I didn't tell anybody. And of course we didn't have the internet and all that. But now even I, who is tolerant of many things, this ongoing obsession that fandom has with the hatred for The Last Jedi specifically, and even I've talked about how I don't like Force Awakens. I'll tell you something about Force Awakens, though. Force Awakens did not have any moments where the visual effects bothered me. They didn't have, it was all story. You know, Force Awakens is a handsomely mounted production. Everything that really bothered me in Force Awakens is story based. And I've realized that with Star Trek, with the 8th season of Game of Thrones, with Last Jedi, with Force Awakens, I really believe that the toxic fandom, look, there's two things going on with the way I see them with toxic fandom. And I only use that as a term that everybody understands. But I think the thing that I really want to address is what people are really reacting to. The hatred, the Star Wars hatred, is what they're reacting to is bad storytelling. You know, and let's put aside, there is an element certainly of misogyny and racism and all of that. That's there as well, because people are talking about this social justice warrior agenda. I'm like, I don't believe in any of that. The movies are now a global marketplace. The reason they're changing is because if you're making a movie, any movie, not necessarily a Star Wars movie or a Harry Potter movie or a James Bond movie, not necessarily, it's not just franchise movies, it's every single movie now. When you are making a film, you must take into consideration the global marketplace, period. It is not, I'll flat out say it. Anybody that's talking about a social justice warrior agenda, you're wrong. You're wrong. We live in a world now where movies are now a global product. And they weren't always a global product because you couldn't get movies into theaters in Russia or India or especially China. So what people are doing are making movies for global audiences, period. And when I hear people talk about social justice warriors and all this, it's so weird to me because that seems like such an American. It goes back. It's steeped in our American uh, thing, and there is definitely weird misogyny and weird racism and all that going on. It's all part of that. But what people are really objecting to, I think, they're mistaking it for a social justice warrior agenda. What they're really responding to is unsatisfying storytelling. Storytelling that doesn't make sense. Storytelling that is, well, I'll just say it goes off the rails, is not true to what has come before. That's what I've certainly felt about Game of Thrones season 8. I think not only did Game of Thrones season 8 disappoint me, I think it diminished all of Game of Thrones because you expect when you're as immersed in stories as you can get, and Game of Thrones had everybody immersed, that it's going somewhere. And it's going somewhere satisfying. You know, and I think about the fact that the Shawshank Redemption is coming back to theaters next week. It's its 25th anniversary. I think the Shawshank Redemption is a kind of a movie that I would say, like The Boys, it sticks the landing. And any great story has to have the Burnett axiom. Never put your universe before your story or your characters. Any great story has great characters and has a great story. And a great story presupposes a great ending. Now, there are great storytellers, such as Stephen King, that can get away with having sort of weaker endings. But I think what we are responding to as fans, and let's be clear, when a multinational corporation is making a product, such as, say, Disney, they need to appeal to their global marketplace. They're not appealing to a certain agenda because an agenda, look, if the idea that you're going to promote white men or something, or that we don't like white men, and that's going to be part of an agenda that's going to play in China, a country that's full of Chinese people, is sort of silly. No, what you want to do is you want to appeal. You're giving the Chinese audience, because of the language barrier and the cultural differences that we have. That's why action movies travel well, is so you don't need to know the colloquialisms and you don't need to know the regional things that you might need to know to understand a story. That's why comedies don't necessarily travel well foreign, because people's humor is very different from country to country. There's certain kinds of humor that travel well, but there's a lot of humor that does not. That's why you don't see comedies from America dominating the global marketplace. And that's why you do see action movies like the Fast and the Furious franchise working well in China, because those colloquialisms aren't as important to movies like Fast and the Furious. The action is something that is easily discernible, even if you don't necessarily know the language as well as you might. And that's what's going on. So what's happening in our global marketplace is we are seeing more inclusion, especially in American movies, because so much of the movie business is based now on foreign dollars. And indeed, most American big budget movies are making more money foreign than they are making domestic. So that's why we want to have more people of different ethnicities. You're going to see a lot more people of Chinese descent in films. Now, I like this. I think this is a good thing, because as somebody who's been watching lots of foreign cinema, and indeed, I watch a lot of Asian cinema, so it's always funny to me when people are talking about inclusion, having Asian Americans in movies to see more inclusion in film. The first thing I'm always struck by is, oh, wait a minute, Tony Leung, the man Tony Leung, is one of my favorite actors, you know. And it's because I've been watching Chinese movies, and I don't think of them when I watch a Chow Yun-Fat movie. I never think to myself, "Oh, I'm going to go watch my favorite actor who's Chinese, so it's time for a Chow Yun-Fat movie." No, Chow Yun-Fat to me was just badass. I mean, his character of Tequila in John Woo's Hard Boiled is just one of my favorite movie characters. I don't sit there and go, I need to go watch my favorite Chinese actor now. He's just an actor I dig, you know? Checky Cario, who's French. He's a great character actor. I'll watch anything with Checky Cario in it. And I don't think to myself, oh, it's time for me to go watch a French actor now. No. And that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with stories that are unsatisfying because at the corporate level are mandating things that they want to see based on certain analytics or whatever. And you can never tell a story based on a good story can never, I mean, I'm not saying it never, maybe it can be shaped to be something good, but a story only works when it's true to itself. And I think that when people say, oh, it's agenda-based storytelling, what they're really reacting to is elements that are shoehorned into the film that on one hand, I think to at a very superficial level, they come off as being agenda-based or social justice warrior things or whatever, when really what it is, it's an appeal to the widest possible audience. And that's where your stories are being compromised, the things that are being done. And you've got filmmakers, world-class filmmakers. I mean, it's funny to me to see Rian Johnson be pilloried because I loved Brick when I first saw it. I love what he did with making a noir detective story in a high school milieu. Brilliant idea. I really like Looper. Very interesting time travel story. His episodes of Breaking Bad, amazing. Knives Out, by all accounts, is great. The Brothers Bloom, not as effective but I still enjoyed watching it. So Rian Johnson to me is a great filmmaker, and watching him being pilloried based on someone's disliking Return of the Jedi, it just gets tiresome after a while. However, that being said, there is some really cogent analysis online. I've talked about this before with people like Critical Drinker, with people like Mahler, with Red Letter Media's deep dives into the Star Wars prequel trilogy and the Next Generation films. They're highly critical of these things, but they are concentrating on story most of the time. I mean, sometimes, Critical Drinker, as much as I love him, he delves into that social justice warrior area. So does Mahler. But for the most part, they're concentrating on storytelling. Now, got me thinking, what are stories? Like, why do we dig them? But before I'm going to read an article from 2011. But before I read an article, I see that a lot of you are firing off chats to me. And I want to get to your chats. Word balloon from John Suntress is here. Look, you know what? As much as I talk about Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great, I also feel like I should do the same thing every time John Suntress is here with the Word Balloon podcast. If you're not listening to his Word Balloon podcast, you've got years to delve in to the Word Balloon podcast, because John's been doing it for a long time. It's a great podcast with your favorite comic creators and many other purveyors of pop culture. I suggest you all go to the Word Balloon podcast and check it out. Anyway, here's what John says. No disrespect to other pundits, but you and Campia have a track record of informed criticism. In your case, going back to the 90s. Perspective matters. Well, John, thank you for saying that. I mean, one of the things that it's not like I always forget to mention, because why would you list a resume? But in the mid 90s, I did write professionally for Sci-Fi Universe magazine. I was their critic at large. I wrote about film. I wrote reviews of new movies, and I wrote long retrospective articles on things like Rollerball or UFO. And I did appear on a TV show often that was on the Sci-Fi Channel called SF Vortex, that was hosted by Blind Date's Roger Lodge. I feel terrible about this, but on the Burnettwork, you can go down and find one of my appearances on these shows. I was on with Mark DePay, who directed the original Spawn movie, and Eric Wallace, who's a good friend of mine and the executive producer of The Flash right now. He and I just eviscerated Mark DePay talking about the Spawn film. So yes, I have a long professional history of reviewing movies. I don't really like to do that anymore, but being a pundit. So John, I appreciate you you pointing that out. And then, of course, I've actually made films, and I'm continuing to make movies. I'm making a movie now. So yes, I do try and bring a different perspective, and I think it's a different perspective than most YouTubers in the space. I mean, I would never say that I'm in the same league as Kevin Smith, but I think Kevin Smith and I share the same DNA as far as our movie punditry goes. Brian Erdy is here. Brian Erdy says, "Hi, new to the channel. Can you explain the meaning behind Post-Geek Singularity?" And no cool t-shirt today? By the way, Rambo Last Blood score is great. Well, Brian, those are a lot of questions. I will take them one by, not a lot of questions, but first of all, thanks for being new to the channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And if you haven't liked these chats, please hit like, because as Gary Beekler over at Nerdrotic says, and by the way, you know what? I want to say that I watch my fellow YouTube pundits. I watched Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers. As a matter of fact, he called me out today and mentioned my tweet about Empire Strikes Back. He called me Robert Michael Burnett, but that's okay. He doesn't really know who I am. But I appreciated the shout out. So even though I mostly vehemently disagree with a lot of what Jeremy says, I do watch his channel, because I think that's okay to watch people that you disagree with, because it's interesting to hear from his point of view. It's also interesting to hear from a lot of Fandom Menace channels. And I like a lot of the Fandom Menace channels, even though they're different from me. And I very much like Gary Beekler. I really like Nerdrotic's channel. And he did a really interesting video yesterday about Star Trek and Picard and where the franchise is at. And it's interesting because even though I disagree with a lot of these channels, we do intersect. I mean, I really like the people over at Midnight's Edge. I don't always agree with them, certainly not. But I do like the work they do. And I think you might disagree with their brand or their opinion, but they do a good job, and they put a lot of time and effort into what they're doing. And I enjoy appearing on Midnight's Edge. I like mixing it up with other people. And I really like Gary Beekler a lot. And so there's a lot of what they call Fandom Menace channels that I'll watch. And I enjoy some of the personalities, even if I disagree with them. You know, I mean, there's something, what all of these people have is passion. And I like their passion. I mean, Gary Beekler ran a comic book store. He's a father. I like the guy. You know, we've had a few back and forths, but I've never met him personally. But he did a good job on this Picard video. I quite enjoyed it. But the Post-Geek Singularity, basically, Brian, it's nonsensical. It's just something I made up. Now, why I came up with this is there's a guy named Ray Kurzweil. He's an author, and the idea of the singularity. The singularity basically is when AI becomes sentient, self-aware. Skynet, you know, Colossus, the Forbin Project, Her, many of the things that we've seen. When AI becomes self-aware, that's when the singularity happens. When artificial intelligence truly becomes autonomous, self-aware, and can basically live or grow or evolve unfettered and unconstrained by human hands. So that's what the singularity is. Ray Kurzweil wrote a book on it. Very interesting stuff. Now, what I think has happened, what I call the post-geek singularity, and there's a woman on Twitter that follows me that will call me out. She wrote it. She was going back and forth about what's the difference between a geek and a nerd. I understand they can be interchangeable, but I like geek more than nerd. Nerd to me, geek, I don't know. There's just something about geek that I like better. You know, I've written for a magazine called Geek. But you know, the geek nerd wars. But anyway, so the post-geek singularity is that when I was growing up, very few people loved science fiction, fantasy, horror, video games, sci-fi, comic books. I had a very small cross-section of friends or people that liked these things. And certainly there were hardly any women amongst these people. And now with something that I really do think began with Star Wars, but we now live in a world where a number of things happen. The tech industry arose, which is predominantly, as we all know, even to this day, a geek or a nerd industry, however you want to call it. Geeks created tech, and tech has now, it's ubiquitous. It's conquered the world. I'm talking to you because of big tech. So we live in a world where literally all of the geeks, geek interests, geek technology, geek science, all of those things have happened. And we reached when geeks became the singularity for geeks to me is when the science fiction convention goers in the 70s would say mundanes, when geek culture transcended normalcy, whatever that is. And we now live in a geek world, a geek dominated world. And it's really interesting because culturally, and I think that the geek world is very different from the entrenched old school, say, Republican world that we live in. And we're also in the midst of a huge social transitional period of time. We have a younger generation that's much more tolerant, much more open, much more accepting of different kinds of people. And we're seeing this transition. But the geek world has become the dominant force on the planet. So hence, we are living in the post-geek singularity. The geek singularity has happened. I stole that from Kurzweil's idea of AI becoming sentient, and that geeks have inherited the earth. This has already happened. So that's where we all live as nerds, as geeks, and the fact that it's not just guys, it's everybody. It's everybody from all walks of life, all around the planet. I was watching a video. I was watching Rob Zombie on Joe Rogan yesterday. Rob Zombie talks about how he's got fans that come up to him that are fans of his movies that are not necessarily metalheads. You know, they're coming up in three-piece suits because they like his movies. The metalheads or that like White Zombie are different kinds of fans. But that's what the post-geek singularity is. That's where we live, as evidenced by YouTube. And what's great about it is, I mean, this channel, not so much, but when you go to Comic-Con now, there's just as many girls as there are guys. There's whole families. There's moms and dads and brothers and sisters and young and old, grandparents, multi-generations of geeks. This was never happening back in the day. And now there's something for everyone. The rise of video games and anime brought girls into the fold, which is terrific. And it's great for everyone. So that's the post-geek singularity. In terms of, to be honest, I was not wearing a geeky t-shirt today because before I came on the show, I was recording a couple of Living the Lucky Tiger Life podcasts with James Hills from the mantripping.com blog. James Hills, I've been doing some work with James. It's really interesting. James, he's like a Mentor was in the old Shazam. By the way, now that I brought this up, Shazam, the Saturday morning Shazam live action series with Mentor and Billy Batson is coming out on Blu-ray, and they went back to the original camera negatives. So, I mean, I know it was done for kids on Saturday morning, but anybody who goes back to the original camera negatives, those Shazam shows, I bet, look amazing. So anyway, James Hills is like Mentor. Instead of driving around in a Winnebago, James travels the highways and byways of the land, going places and doing things, drinking the drinks, eating the food, living in the hotels, just traveling around, finding where men want to go, hence man tripping. So mantripping.com, I've been talking to him a lot for my Living the Lucky Tiger Life broadcasts, videos. The last one I did was when he went and saw the rollout of the new Corvette. So check those out, but we did a couple today. That's why I'm not wearing a geeky shirt, but sometimes you got to change it up, go black. Jeffrey Mao says, by the way, I haven't seen Rambo yet. Oh, here's something interesting that I wanted to read. So last night, as you all know, we had three big movies opening today. Ad Astra, the Brad Pitt starring the James Gray sci-fi film. We've got Rambo Last Blood opening and the Downton Abbey movie. And the Downton Abbey movie smoked both Ad Astra and Rambo at the Thursday preview movie theater times, or whatever you want to call it. They're out. Smoked them. So Downton Abbey might win the weekend, which I think is kind of cool because it's a fan base that I'm not really a part of, but I love when fan bases, Downton Abbey nerds or geeks, whatever you want to call them, they're going to rule the roost this weekend, I think is great. Jeffrey Mao says, I propose a new axiom. You can't stick the landing if you screw up the takeoff. I like that. I think that's great. Willow Yang asks, this is a great question. Willow, you and I we park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. Willow Yang says, if you're in the boys universe, would you date Soups? What kind of powers entice you? And are there any powers that you'd avoid? Oh my God, I could do a whole show on that. Well, it depends. I look, Starlight clearly is right up my alley. She's obviously cute as a button and very attractive, and I like her personality on the show. But I like Queen Maeve too. I would date both of those. Queen Maeve's kind of a damaged person. I want to help her out. I know she's batting for the other team right now, but maybe she could come back to my side. Would I? But yeah, I would date a Soup. I mean, I think dating a Soup would be, it would really depend. Obviously, look, dating any woman can be, intimidating. Guys are always worried. We've always got performance issues. I mean, men, when you think about dating, are you rich enough? Are you good looking enough? Are you smart enough? Do you have a big enough dick? Are you good enough in bed? All these things run through guys' heads. Now, when you're dating a superhero, if I was dating a female superhero, it would be rough. I mean, it would depend on the fact that presumably she could save me. Would it be emasculating? And they deal with that a little bit. But it would depend. I probably would. I don't know if I would have to be, you as a guy would have to be pretty secure in yourself to date a superhero. It really depends. I mean, but look, I love Teen Titans. Marv Wolfman and George Perez's Teen Titans. And of course, Wonder Girl had a human husband and she loved him to death. So I grew up with a fine depiction of a regular human being, a human man dating a superheroine. And I dug that. I mean, and Wonder Girl was very, very attractive. And I would dig that. Powers that I would avoid, though, probably mind reading powers. Like, I don't think I could date a female Mesmer, because I would be afraid if she knew what I was thinking a lot of the time. Not because of what I was thinking would be necessarily bad, but I think she might hate the fact or how long and how many hours of my life I spent contemplating how much I would want to live aboard the USS Enterprise, for instance, and how much I would enjoy that. Or how I think about, I can't wait to delve into my Stephen King novel again to see where the story's going to go. Or how much of my mind is thinking about what giant robot model I want to get next. I think that I would be called out. Then, of course, there's a lot where I'm thinking about when I'm editing something, it never goes away. When you're editing something, I'm constantly thinking about what I'm going to edit tomorrow, how we're going to edit. Gabe Bologna, the director of Tango Shalom, was here yesterday. We were talking about sound design on the film and working on that. And he's here for the next couple of days. Then he has to leave town for a couple of weeks. And then we're going to get back into it. But we're going to finish the sound design of the film by the end of October. And it's always going on. So I couldn't date anybody that could read my mind. And I probably would avoid a woman who had super strength, only because we saw what can happen in The Boys if a woman, say, has super strength and loses control and she's sitting on your face, which I quite enjoy. And I would not want what happened to the poor guy, the landlord in The Boys, when he was doing the thing that she was asking, that I also enjoy. He got his head crushed in. So dead. Her super strength just popped his head like a melon. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that to happen. By the way, spoiler alert. But, I would flight. I would definitely not avoid flight. I'd love a woman who could fly. I would love a woman who might be super intelligent. I would love a woman who could see the future or travel through time. Those are the things I would like. But, super strength and mind reading would be things I would probably avoid. If I was dating somebody who was invisible, that might be a little awkward sometimes, because I'd wonder if she was spying on me. So I might avoid invisibility. So I don't know. Razman's Reality is here. Hey, Rob, what you have been talking about the last couple of days about toxic fandom has really struck a chord with me, because I think it's extended to just people's nature in general. Well, to be honest, I completely agree with you. As a matter of fact, I have received, I received a letter from somebody that shall remain nameless, a letter that both made me sad and equal parts sad and furiously angry. but also that person in the letter brought up the toxicity, and even things toxicity in these live chats and toxicity on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, which I'm aware of, and I don't like that. I don't want to see this descend into that. And she also pointed out, or he also pointed out, that how quickly your fans can turn on you, and that John Campea, doesn't talk about Star Wars much. Fans can really turn on you, and I've seen that happen. It absolutely can happen. I think Gilbert is now moving. I'm going to move and let Gilbert out. Hey, buddy. He's emerging from underneath the desk. But yeah, you just never know. I mean, and the funny thing about this is, like, I do this because it's fun. If it's not fun anymore, I mean, I'll just say, well, that's it. The first season of Robservations, that's now lasted 100 or 226 issues or episodes, it has come to an end. And hopefully, I'll bring it back. It hasn't come to that yet, but I think you're right. I mean, I think people's nature, look, I think people ultimately, for the most part, are pretty cool. I've said this a lot, that I think people are cool. I like people. And I think that we have a great community here for the most part. And I think that I would like to continue to concentrate on stuff that we like and not stuff that we don't like. But I will say that I don't think we should ever stop calling out, say, bad storytelling. And I do think that there are elements of certainly Star Trek Discovery, and indeed the entire Star Trek franchise. One of the things I think that Gary Buechler was doing in his video I liked yesterday was everybody wants Star Trek Picard to be good. I certainly do. I want nothing more than to watch a Star Trek show that is awesome. So I'm going into Star Trek Picard cautiously, but I want it to be good. The problem is there's no evidence to suggest that it will be good other than Patrick Stewart's involvement. I'm not going to go off on a rant about Star Trek Discovery, but I found Star Trek Discovery to be lacking, to say the least. And everything that's gone on behind the scenes on that show is not conducive to telling a good story. And the people that are involved, it's a job. It's a very lucrative job. It's one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive television show ever made. Just like Disney. Look, Disney bought Star Wars. It was a huge gamble. I know it seems like it isn't, but it is. It was a huge gamble. The Force Awakens, they hired J.J. Abrams, whether you love him or not. I'm sure he's a very nice guy. He certainly has a very savvy business acumen, and he knows what he's doing, hence his new deal with Warner Brothers. I don't find him to be a very particularly compelling director, and I've been let down a lot by his television shows in the past. So I can only go by that. I can go by his previous work. Nothing that J.J. Abrams does will excite me unless I see something that he makes that excites me. Maybe Rise of Skywalker will be that thing. I can't imagine it would be, because there's no foundation being built on it. But as far as things like Star Trek, I want Star Trek to be great. I do. But it's infuriating seeing how they're moving forward to do just that. So I think people are genuinely good. I do. But I think that it's easier, just like I titled this chat, just like Star Wars said, it's easier and more seductive and more satisfying, I think, to be angry. Because anger, you can feel it more. When something really great happens, it's great, but I don't know if it sits with you as long, and I don't think it's supposed to. It's just like an orgasm, comes pretty quickly, so to speak. And I wish I could keep an orgasm going for hours at a time, but you can't. And that's one of the things that makes it great. And men physiologically, sometimes it takes us a while to recharge the batteries to do it again. That usually was never my problem, just so you know. But the anger you can feel gets to fester and linger for long periods of time. So I think it's harder to be happy, because I do think happiness can be a choice. You can choose to be happy, or you can choose to wallow in anger. For me, there is just too much great stuff happening. I found out today that I'll give you an example. So Eagle Moss, that makes all those cool Star Trek collectibles and many other collectibles, they have a program. You subscribe, and every month for $40, they send you 4 different parts of a 1/8 scale James Bond Aston Martin DB5, the Goldfinger Aston Martin. And a 1/8 scale car is like, it's like this big. And it's metal. It's die-cast metal. So it's a subscription. What you do is you subscribe, and they send you 4 parts of this kit. And then you're going to build it. And it's going to be expensive ultimately. But if you look at it and you think, okay, I'm going to go out one less night a month or something. You got your $40, and at the end, it's going to cost like probably $1,000, whatever. But you get to build it. It's got lights. It's going to be this big. And I get these emails that are like, oh, we've just shipped your, issues 17, 18, 19, and 20, and they're on their way. And, then I know that, there's joy there. And yeah, okay, it's external joy. You're getting a thing. But to me, I love that. I've been building models since I was a kid. I've owned Aston Martin DB5s, James Bond, the Corgi with the ejector seat, since I was a kid. So an Aston Martin DB5, now it's the adult big miniature, 1/8 scale. But that gives me joy. And I don't sit there and go, Spectre sucked, I hate James Bond. No, there's enough going on in the world where there's a lot of great stuff. No Time to Die, the new Bond film that we're all going to go and see in London, that's coming down the pike. I got the DB5 coming out. Big Chief Studios in the UK is making more James Bond figures. I mean, there's so much to love. If you don't love the Star Wars movies, if you don't love Last Jedi, there is still kick-ass Star Wars stuff. Hot Toys just announced a Jawa Gonk droid 2-pack. You can get a Leia and Endor fatigues and an Ewok 2-pack. I mean, there's a lot of Star Wars. There's cool Star Wars stuff. If you're a Star Wars fan, there is no shortage of cool Star Wars things all around us, which are great. So maybe the movies aren't so great, but we got The Mandalorian coming down. I haven't been so excited about something Star Wars related. Look, I'll admit it. I was hugely excited for Phantom Menace, right? But The Mandalorian looks like it's worthy of getting excited for. I mean, it's theirs to lose. I can't wait to see The Mandalorian. I think it's going to be great. I think if it's great, then, I'm back on the Star Wars train. Not that I'm not on the Star Wars train. I still buy. There's so much that Ralph McQuarrie book set. Come on. There's still stuff to love. So why, you might not like the Star Wars movies coming out. You might, and legitimately, as I've said, I think the storytelling has been substandard. Also, you went on to ask, you make the comment, I have cerebral palsy, and I really want to step up to another level in my own creative work, but the current equipment that I have prevents me from being able to do so without giving away any names. I feel your pain. I think I've told this story before, but when I was in college, when I was at the Evergreen State College, there was a guy, this guy Brian, who I first saw in the computer lab, and he had CP, and he couldn't speak, and his hands were they were like this. He had to hold them like this. The disease held him like this, and he was a genius. But it took him forever to work on the computer. And he had severe CP. And people treated him as if he was developmentally disabled or somehow. He wasn't. He was a very smart guy. His body was just in the grips of this disease. And I used to just see him on campus and would just be like, hey, man, how's it going? What are you working on tonight? And I would see him in the computer lab and would just chat. And we sort of became friendly. And it used to bother me because of the way he looked and the way he held himself. People would shun him. And I got a call from the housing office. This is at the Evergreen State College. I got the call from the housing office. And they had requested his roommate had to left school. And he needed another roommate to help him. And I requested me, and I'd never been asked. It was my last quarter at Evergreen. We had quarters, not semesters. So it was my third quarter. It was my last quarter, my spring quarter before I was leaving to transfer to USC. So I figured, okay. And I worked in Seattle on the weekends. So I was his roommate. And boy, talk about an eye-opening experience. I mean, we would go to the local mall in Olympia, Washington together and to see how people treated him. And I knew that he thought just like anybody else. He was betrayed by his body, really. And I feel your pain. And I know exactly what you mean. And it was a really tough thing, but I'll tell you something. You want to talk about courage. Brian taught me a lot about living your life courageously. So I know what you're saying. Brian, I think he got a government job. I haven't talked to him since 1988. So it's been over 30 years. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I heard he got a government job. And and we had a lot of situations that I had to help him deal with, physical situations, which were unpleasant and embarrassing for anybody, much less, somebody like Brian. But it was eye-opening. So I do feel where you're at. It must be incredibly frustrating for you. But first of all, thank you for supporting the channel. That was very nice of you to do so. But yeah, I do. One day I should write a book. I swear to God. Wow. Razman's reality keeps going. He says, because that's not the kind of person I am, I reached out to some people who I knew would have the necessary connections to help me explain my situation, to simply asking if they could help me or point me in the direction of someone who could. Not one single person ever bothered to respond with any kind of guidance at all. It's really hard to ask for help if it's not something any of us wants to do or wants to be in a position to have to do. But it's also very brave to do so, I think. So at the very least, you should be courteous enough to be like, I can't help you, but maybe this person can. I'm just venting. Well, Razman's reality, I feel you, dude. I understand. I try and be open. A lot of people ask me for stuff. People want me to read their books or their scripts or watch their movies and all that. And a lot of the time I try and do that as much as I can. I just get so involved with what I'm doing. It's really hard. But I think the hardest thing in the world is to genuinely help people who reach out and ask for help. And I know where you're coming from, especially having CP like that. Life's already hard enough. And you know what, by the way, I know I certainly didn't. Nobody knows what that's like. You can read about it. You can intellectually maybe understand it. But until you've actually experienced it with somebody who's going through it, you really have no idea. And when it happened to me, it was one of the most illuminating and also maddening and yet exhilarating and eye-opening things that's ever happened. So anyway. Koba says, what is your opinion on HBO's Westworld? I really liked the first season of Westworld. I thought it was really interesting. I thought the second season was, it was all over the place, kind of a disaster. Because, first of all, it was really handsomely made. I loved all the actors. But again, I think the problem with Westworld, and they had a lot of problems when they were first making it, it became this... It became needlessly convoluted. And the story that they were telling, it's not like we haven't seen that story all the way back to, well, the original Westworld and Blade Runner and Battlestar Galactica. The idea of the hosts or artificial life that was treated badly by human beings, developing self-awareness, the singularity happens, and they turn the tables on their oppressors. That's a really interesting story. But at the end of the day, a lot of what was going on in Westworld, it didn't really mean anything for as highfalutin as it was. I mean, they were doing things like hiding the hiding of the time periods. I get it. I appreciate that. You're like, ooh, what's happening? But once it's revealed as to what's going on with all that, then you ask yourself, why were you doing that? Like, you were trying to create fake involvement for me. But I mean, it is handsome. I got to tell you, I'm intrigued by season 3. What's Aaron Paul doing? They're in the cities. What's happening? Again, at the end of Alex Garland's Ex Machina, where our robot goes out into the world. I like that story. What are they going to do now? Are they just going to be hell-bent to destroy humanity, or are they going to do something else? I want to watch it. I can't wait. Joseph Eric says, Rob, when are we going to see the new setup you announced? Soon. Soon. It's kind of like Volcris in Star Trek 3. When do I get paid? Soon, Captain. Quite soon. Although I'm not going to be destroyed. You're going to see it. The only thing I'm waiting for now, I was supposed to get it, but is an internet connection. Believe it or not, because it's in a different building. I need the internet connection. I can't run it from here there. Mukbang Review says, PGS union dues. Do you have any favorite dark comedies? Mine is Serial Mom. I know you like Heathers. Any thoughts, recommendations are appreciated. Thanks for the outstanding shows. Well, Mukbang Reviews, thank you. I mean, the first dark comedy that I love that comes to mind is Dr. Strangelove. I love Dr. Strangelove. I think it's one of the great black comedies ever made. I do think Kubrick's Lolita is a pretty dark comedy. Yes, I do love Heathers. I think Battle Royale, the Japanese film Battle Royale, I find that to be amusing. If you haven't seen Battle Royale, not Battle Royale 2 Requiem, but pretty good. But you know what? I'm going to come back to that because I wanted to read this article that I found when I was looking up the idea of stories. Like, why do we love stories? You know, why is Star Wars so endearingly popular to everybody and enduringly popular? So and by the way, I highly recommend doing this. If you're like, what are stories? Just do that. Just whatever you're thinking about, if something's on your mind, just Google search it and start going down that rabbit hole. What comes up? Well, I love Wired. I loved Wired magazine, and now they've moved mostly over on online. But I've been reading Wired. I think Wired's one of the greatest cultural magazines about culture, about our digital culture, and it has been for a very long time. So I'm always looking at Wired. So what popped up? This article from March of 2011, believe it or not, by Frank Rose. And this article is The Art of Immersion. Why do we tell stories? And I'm going to read this article. What is it about stories anyway? Anthropologists tell us that storytelling is central to human existence. It's that it's common to every known culture. That it involves a symbiotic exchange between teller and listener, an exchange we learn to negotiate in infancy. Just as the brain detects patterns in the visual forms of nature, a face, a figure, a flower, and in sound, so too it detects patterns in information. Stories are recognizable patterns, and in those patterns, we find meaning. We use stories to make sense of our world and to share that understanding with others. They are the signal within the noise. So powerful is our impulse to detect story patterns that we see them even when they're not there. In a landmark 1944 study, 34 humans, Massachusetts college students actually, though subsequent research suggests that they could have been just about anyone, were shown a short film and asked what was happening in it. The film showed two triangles and a circle moving across a two-dimensional surface. The only other object on screen was a stationary rectangle, partially open on one side. Only one of the test subjects saw the scene for what it was: geometric shapes moving across a plane. Everyone else came up with elaborate narratives to explain what the movements were about. Typically, the participants viewed the triangles as two men fighting, and the circle as a woman trying to escape the bigger, bullying triangle. Instead of registering inanimate shapes, they imagined humans with vivid inner lives. The circle was worried. The circle and the little triangle were innocent young things. The big triangle was blinded by rage and frustration. But if stories themselves are universal, the way we tell them changes with the technology at hand. Every new medium has given rise to a new form of narrative. In Europe, the invention of the printing press and movable type around 1450 led to the emergence of periodicals and the novel. The invention of the motion picture camera around 1890 set off an era of feverish experimentation that led to the development of feature films by 1910. Television, invented around 1925, gave rise a quarter century later to I Love Lucy and the highly stylized form of comedy that became known as the sitcom. Later in 1977, storytelling, technology, special effects gave rise, that's right, to Star Wars. As each of these media achieved production and distribution on an industrial scale, we saw the emergence of 20th century mass media, newspapers, magazines, movies, music, TV, and with that, there was no role left for the consumer except to consume. Then, just as we'd gotten used to consuming sequential narratives in carefully prescribed point-by-point fashion, came the internet. The internet is the first medium that can act like all media. It can be text, or audio, or video, or all of the above. It's nonlinear, thanks to the World Wide Web and the revolutionary convention of hyperlinking. It's inherently participatory, not just interactive in the sense that it responds to your commands, but an instigator constantly encouraging you to comment, to contribute, to join in. And it is immersive, meaning that you can use it to drill down as deeply as you like about anything you want to know about. So powerful is our impulse to detect story patterns that we see them even when they're not there. At first, like film and television in their earliest days, the internet served mainly as a way of retransmitting familiar formats. For all of the talk of new media, it functioned as little more than a new delivery mechanism for old media, newspapers, magazines, music. The emergence of peer-to-peer file sharing networks encouraged a lot of people to get their deliveries for free. But as disruptive as the net has been to media businesses, it's only now having an impact on media forms. Remember, this article's from 2011. Under its influence, a new type of narrative is emerging, one that's told through many media at once, in a way that's nonlinear, participatory, and above all, immersive. This is deep media. Stories that take you deeper than an hour-long TV drama or a 2-hour movie or a 30-second spot will permit. The most talked about ad campaign of the past year involved a former football player who took questions about Old Spice on Twitter for 2 days and responded to the best of them minutes later on YouTube. Nike Plus, a web service that doubles as a marketing platform, functions as a branded corner of cyberspace where runners can keep up their stats and tell their own stories. Tron Legacy was preceded by Flynn Lives, an alternate reality game that engaged millions of people worldwide in the 18 months before the movie came out. The 2010 season of the BBC's Doctor Who was made up of 13 television episodes and 4 that came in the form of downloadable video games. Lost told a story so convoluted that audiences had little choice but to work together to decipher it communally online. An artistic movement, albeit an organic and as yet unstated one, is forming, David Shields writes in Reality Hunger, a manifesto, a book whose truth to its time is underscored by the gleeful way it samples from other sources. What are its key components? Shields names several: randomness, spontaneity, and emotional urgency, reader-viewer participation and involvement, anthropological autobiography, a thirst for authenticity coupled with a love of artifice, a blurring to the point of invisibility of any distinction between fiction and nonfiction, the lure and blur of the real. We stand now at the intersection of lure and blur. The future beckons, but we're only part way through inventing it. As we can see the outlines of a new art form, but its grammar is as tenuous and elusive as the grammar of cinema a century ago. We know this much. People want to be immersed. They want to get involved in a story, to carve out a role for themselves, to make it their own. But how is the author supposed to accommodate them? What if the audience runs away with the story? And how do we handle the blur? Not just between fiction and fact, but between author and audience, entertainment and advertising, story and game. A lot of smart people in film, in television, in video games, in advertising, in technology, even in neuroscience, are trying to sort these questions out. The art of immersion is their story. And by the way, Again, look this up. The Art of Immersion. Why do we tell stories? Part 2 of this is the Star Wars generation. Excuse me. Again, Wired.com, 2011. Just as relevant now as it was then. So mukbang reviews. I mean, I'm thinking more about dark comedies. To be honest, The Boys is a dark comedy. It's more than a comedy, but I would definitely consider watching that because it's amazing, amazing stuff. So it comes down to all good reasons. Like, why do we watch stories? Why? I mean, I think all of those were good reasons, like they said. But what's most important, people want to be immersed. And what Star Wars and Star Trek and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and all of Dune, all of these great stories do is immerse us within those stories. Now, what happens is when the creators are influenced by outside forces, most obviously economic forces when it comes to Star Wars or larger anything that's being made on a cinematic level, on that writ large on the big screen. If you're doing that, there's a lot of money involved, and the problem is when money is involved, you have to mitigate your risks, and then the sanctity and the reality, the verisimilitude of the story is sacrificed in order to make sure that the risk is mitigated. And that's what's happened to Star Wars, and that's what's happened to Star Trek. There's unfortunately the stories that are being told. I mean, it was interesting when you watch. I love Star Trek, but Star Trek was like an anthology show. You know, Star Trek and Star Trek: The Next Generation. Literally, you had 79 episodes of the original series, 178 episodes of Next Generation, and each episode was different. Sometimes you had a two-parter, like there was one two-parter in the original series, The Menagerie, and then of course you had Best of Both Worlds, and then you had episodes like Unification or Gambit or Chain of Command 1 and 2 and Next Gen. But for the most part, these were stories. Some were better than others, and there was enough there, 26 episodes a season, that you could find pretty much something to like in every season. But, you know, with Star Wars, it's 1 2-hour movie, or now we're going to get a show, The Mandalorian. But imagine with a TV show, you're trying to tell, you know what your budget's basically fixed. So you know what you're spending every episode. But with Star Wars, they're spending, it's a huge risk, $200 million a movie now. And when you're doing that, the story, everybody's second guessing the story. So the purity of the story being told is never going to be. That's why I'm really excited about The Mandalorian, even though it's going to be, I'm sure, serialized. It's going to be really interesting to see a story that is not as constrained by the economic realities of movie making. I mean, yes, it's going to be Disney Plus, but Disney Plus is not just the Mandalorian network. It's Disney Plus. So while they want the Mandalorian to be great, it's, as Jon Favreau himself has said, it's not like what happened. It's more like the original Star Wars when they spent less, well, 10 million, let's just say 10 million on the original movie. I mean, it was a different time. The risks weren't as great. So hopefully the storytelling when it comes to the Mandalorian will be, I guess the word would be, more pure. We'll have a more pure Star Wars film, or Star Wars, not film, but Star Wars media. The Mandalorian will be pure because there's not as much of an economic risk. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, I thought that was interesting, The Art of Immersion. I just kind of want to read that and see what did you guys think about that? I don't know. You'll have to tell me. I have some letters to read. A few interesting ones. Now, this was pretty interesting. Now, I like this letter. This letter comes from Jesse Flores. And Jesse Flores asks, "Hello, Rob. Thanks for taking the time to read this letter. I know we talk a lot about comics and Star Wars here in the Post-Geek Singularity, but I wanted to touch upon another subgenre in sci-fi. My favorite subgenre, cyberpunk. Dun, dun, dun. Rob, I love this genre. To me, it's the most realistic sci-fi with great ideas about high tech and living in a world where there has been radical changes in the social order of things. I have seen many cyberpunk films, from Blade Runner, Videodrome, Strange Days, A Scanner Darkly, Hackers, The Fifth Element, and The Terminator. Even some terrible cyberpunk films like Johnny Mnemonic I can have fun with. My favorite, of course, is The Matrix. Now, I know the sequels were not as great, but I do enjoy them and find myself defending them from naysayers. Don't even get me started on anime. Okay, fine. I love Ghost in the Shell, Dominion Tank Police, Black Magic, Bubblegum Crisis, Serial Experiments Lane, Ergo Proxy, and many more. The godfather of cyberpunk, William Gibson, I loved reading his Sprawl trilogy, Neuromancer, Count Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive. By the way, Mona Lisa Overdrive is still the greatest term for a female orgasm I've ever come across in my life. I put her into Mona Lisa Overdrive. I love that. Sorry for bragging about my love for the genre, but I read something interesting about this genre. It was written after the show Altered Carbon debuted to mixed results. The show is obviously a success since we're getting a second season, but the article said that cyberpunk is dying since we basically have reached the point where the tech and idea are no longer relevant. It also said that it was the reason for Blade Runner 2049 failing at the box office and for Duncan Jones' Mute being a Netflix disaster. I can't find this article, so I'm sorry for not sending you the link. Anyways, what are your thoughts about cyberpunk? Any films, books, TV shows, and comics you can recommend to me that deal with the genre? Hope to hear from you, Jesse Flores. Well, Jesse, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, so much of science fiction over the last Neuromancer, of course, you know, Tron. I don't think you mentioned, did you mention Tron? No, you didn't mention Tron. To me, Tron and it's interesting that Tron and Blade Runner came out within weeks. You know, they came out together essentially, and they were, to me, the dawn of. I mean, you could go back and you could talk about. I mean, I could make a case for you that Fritz Lang's 1927 film Metropolis is cyberpunk because it was about the ghost in the machine. It was about biology being turned into something mechanical. And you could go back to Fritz Lang's Metropolis and see where cyberpunk began. But I think, you know, both Tron, clearly, to me, what cyberpunk always meant was now that we live in a technological world, a world where, and by the way, technology is going to increasingly, cyberpunk has not ended as a genre. And when someone cites the fact that Blade Runner 2049 didn't succeed because the cyberpunk genre is played out, is an idiot, frankly. So Blade Runner 2049 didn't succeed because Blade Runner was never a big hit in the first place. The whole idea that you're going to make, I love the fact that we got Blade Runner 2049. I love Blade Runner 2049. But I would say another cyberpunk, something that's absolutely cyberpunk, is Battlestar Galactica, especially the Ron Moore version. Or Her, you know, the Spike Jonze film with Scarlett Johansson playing a living and, well, I guess you'd call it living and breathing, but operating system. There's a lot of the idea of cyberpunk. I mean, I've always seen it as hard-boiled noir crossed with the modern age, the computer age, the technological age that we live in. And I don't think, look, you know what's going to happen? What's going to happen is when the one thing that hasn't happened yet that we saw in William Gibson's Neuromancer is people like this Molly, who she actually isn't it Molly who has the sunglasses? We're going to see people literally inset into her face. We're going to see people literally becoming more and more. It's going to be a fusion of biology and technology. We're just at the beginning of the cyberpunk era, really. Now, science fiction has always been forward thinking. That's why we've seen a lot of it. And Blade Runner is the most, by far, Blade Runner is the most influential, perhaps the single most influential piece of cinema, certainly of genre cinema, in the last 40 years. I mean, its influence on anime is incredible. Of course, science fiction movies, Altered Carbon may as well just have been taking place. You might as well have said that the Tyrell Corporation was part of Altered Carbon, all of these books. And by the way, Altered Carbon, that book, that author, again, cyberpunk is alive and well. We got cyberpunk, what is it, 2077 coming out that Keanu Reeves is in. The shadow of Blade Runner lives large. And I like, because the idea that the computer and how it's dominating our life. I mean, I would even go back and Colossus the Forbin Project from 1970, even though the computer's put into the side of a mountain. It's absolutely a cyberpunk film. Moon, anything that you're dealing with, how mankind or people are relating to technology in their lives becomes, in a way, cyberpunk. It's interesting that the punk movement, when that term was originally, when they came up with that, I don't know, was it William Gibson? Did he really coin the phrase in Neuromancer? I think he did. Maybe he did. And that was 84. Neuromancer came out in 84. So he probably did. But, you know, you're coming off the heels of the punk rock movement of the 70s, which is really all about anarchy and tearing down the status quo. You know, this, and it was about youth. I mean, you could say Logan's Run was a cyberpunk movie if you wanted to, really, because you had a society that was controlled and regulated by a computer. And that idea, really, what is cyberpunk? But it's how it's the humans become the punks, utilizing the cyber, the technology of the future. I mean, again, I think my favorite, if you haven't read this, you didn't mention this, my absolute favorite cyberpunk novel, bar none, 100% without exception, is Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which I think is 1990. If you haven't read Snow Crash, most people who know cyberpunk have, you're probably going, of course I read Snow Crash. You've got to read Snow Crash. Not only is Snow Crash one of my favorite science fiction or cyberpunk books I've ever read, it's just one of my favorite books. I don't think that between the big ideas in that book and just how amazingly entertaining that book is to read, and also if you like Neil Stephenson's work, and you got to read Snow Crash and read The Diamond Age. Off the top of my head, those are essential. But the idea of cyberspace and all of that, if you want to read cyberpunk, you've got to read Snow Crash, because it's just so damn good. Yeah. So you need to do that. You need to read that. Let's see if you guys have anything more to say. Wow, this chat has gone on. It's pretty good. Not bad. Gone on for a long time. Let's see. Nope, you're all good. Well, with that, guys, I think I'm going to bring this Friday chat to an end. It's been a fun chat. I've enjoyed this chat quite a bit. First of all, I want to say thank you to my moderators, Detective Jim, the Honorable Mike Bodden, Mayor of Riverdale, Iowa, Greg Smith, who can build a house with his bare hands, and of course, the Sheriff of Nottingham, all the way over from the UK, Terry, my man Terry, who I can't wait to meet when we all see No Time to Die together. I also want to thank Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products, for those men who want to look good and feel great, for sponsoring these chats, sponsoring the channel. And if you want to go to their website at getluckytiger.com, punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, and you can get 20% off your order. And I want to thank all of you imagination connoisseurs, for supporting this channel via the super chats. So also hit like too, and liking and subscribing, which I very much appreciate. Also, I'd forgotten that I did have a store. I put the link up at the top. If you want a Post-Geek, I haven't made a Post-Geek I have a great Post-Geek Singularity logo too. That I like, because it uses microgramma, one of my favorite fonts. I need to make that into a shirt logo. And I will. But you can go to TeePublic, and they've got good shirts. I really like their shirts. I love their hoodies. Winter's coming. It'll make a great Christmas gift. I put the link up at the top, but there are Robservations and Imagination Connoisseur t-shirts, which you can get. They're just kind of fun. And they're having a 35% off sale. So check that out. So, and you can also go to the website. I love people sending me letters. Thank you for sending me letters. Go to the Burnettwork.net. That's the website. You can interact there. There's more than 800 pieces of content. Many of them are your letters. You can interact with the letter writers. Put down a three-word review. 3-word reviews for any movie. We love those. There's the Imagination Connoisseur Gallery. And of course, you can go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. By the way, I'm going to be flat out honest. I've noticed a little toxicity there. I'm going to start getting rid of, if something is too toxic, I don't mean to censor. But what we're supposed to do with the Post-Geek Singularity, share the love, celebrate the love, yub nub, go all Ewok there, man. Celebrate what you like. Tell me what you like. I want to know. I think that's important. That's what we're all about here. That's what you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, that's what you want, isn't it? Isn't that what you want? I mean, come on. Indeed. Anyway, I'm going to bring this chat to an end. Robservations number 226, the show about something. What do I always say? Every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. I will be back tomorrow, and I can't wait. Hopefully next week we'll be moving into the new space, and I think I'm going to have moderator Mike Bodden live on this show either Thursday or Friday, and we're going to do an unboxing of all the stuff you guys have sent to the Robservations P.O. box. So that should be interesting. Well, as always, have a better day.